Hi everyone. Welcome to 5 Keys to Creating a Learning Strategy for Clients and Partners. My name is Brett Wilson. I'll be your moderator today. Just a little housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded. You'll get an email with the link later this week. As you think of questions, please type them into the chat room. Katie and I will be monitoring the panel, and we'll save time at the end so we can answer some questions for you. A little about me. I've been in the learning and development space for almost 30 years. As Cornerstone's Director for Thought Leadership and Advisory Services, I spent a lot of time with our clients, helping them think through their strategies for talent, helping them align their technology to the platform, making sure there's a good intersection by the results of the platform and their intended business outcome. I spent a lot of time researching what's happening in the world of HR and facilitating webinars like this one. Prior to Cornerstone, I spent most of my career in the operations side for both companies that provided learning and for companies that consume and bought learning. And for me, that's a pretty cool perspective because I guess you can say I've worked both sides of the fence, as both a buyer and a provider. I've had the good fortune to have worked in many industry sectors, and my academic background is adult education. About our primary speaker for today's main event, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Lauren Wittstadt, who's a principal at the Educe Group. Educe Group is a consulting firm that specializes in the implementation and adoption of talent management technologies. In her role, Lauren manages system implementation projects for Fortune 500 and other large organizations, delivering strategic consulting to clients in the areas of business process alignment and documentation, governance, change management, and she also serves as a subject matter expert on Cornerstone's platform. She's been doing this for over 10 years, working with clients across multiple industries, including life sciences, finance, manufacturing. Her client list includes KPMG, Bloomberg, Merck, Kellogg's, Moody's Financial, and many others. Lauren, welcome, and thanks for spending time with us today. All right. Before we hear from Lauren, I just want to briefly share some observations with you, kind of to set the stage for what Lauren's going to be talking to us about, and we'll follow up with Q&A at the end. Oops, too fast. Many of you may recognize this guy. It's not clip art. It's actually a picture of Seth Godin, who is a well-known marketing expert and also an author. And he conceived this thing called the connection economy. He maintains that we as humans interact more than any other time in the past, and that only work that matters is work that matters. And he describes in his articles and books the connected economy as a value chain consisting of suppliers, partners, and customers that all need to be connected and all delivering in the same direction. Each has a specific role, a set of deliverables or behavior that have to be aligned in order for a value chain to maximize value to the end customer. Each link of that chain needs to understand what their role is, and extended enterprise learning is a way to actually make that happen. Okay. Godin built a 4-pillar model to describe the connected economy. First, it takes coordination. Before you can market anything, you need to coordinate a group of people to carry it out. Next, your customers need to trust you. Third, you also need permission. Permission to participate comes by knowing what is expected in your role within the connected economy. It's a set of rules. Uber, as an example, if you're a rider, you need to have the app and know how to use it. Same for the driver, but it's a different app, but they too need to know how to use it. And then finally, the exchange of ideas, group collaboration. Godin says that when you combine these 4 things, you're now able to build a network of people who want to talk to each other, hence the connected economy. Which brings us to the basis of extended enterprise. If you want a connected network, extended enterprise is the tool to maximize learning impact across the whole value chain. Now, Lauren will expand on this value chain in her remarks, but it really brings the 4 pillars I just talked about: coordination, trust, permission, and collaboration. It brings them together to enable you as the L&D person to deliver learning specific to each link of the chain and to make effective connections. Each link will know what their role is and the expectations and benefits that can result. So let's take a look at 3 examples of what I'm talking about here. These are 3 examples of customers who use Cornerstone's Extended Enterprise Platform. The American Bankers Association, it's a collection of more than 3,400 banks of the 4 pillars I just talked about. This is a great example of coordination. Now, the ABA needed a learning platform that could reach 150,000 users or learners, but also accommodate local process rules and, have a reasonable degree of local autonomy for their regional admins. And branding was a big deal for them. So they needed a system where they could brand their individual portals. And what we found is when they did that, user adoption went way up because it had the same look and feel that they were used to. Been a huge success for them. And as you can see, their tempo is significant, 150,000 course completions per month using our Extended Enterprise Platform. Let me take you to another example where we've used this, that being MSC Software. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, MSC Software is simulation design software used by design engineers who build engines, cars, ships, almost anything complicated and that has moving parts in it. And their customer base are primarily millennial design engineers. And they, MSC, sought to provide great product training to them and make a profit doing so. This is a great example of the trust and permission pillars I was just telling you about. MSC clients need to trust that their software is useful and reliable, and they need to learn how to use it. MSC, as you can see, has been with us since 2013, and they're a great extended enterprise customer for us. Bring up a third and final example of this, which is Metro PCS. And they sell phones and data plans, much like Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile. But what they really are is they're a network of dealers, and they use the T-Mobile infrastructure for their products. They've been using our Extended Enterprise Platform for a long time, and their instance is a great example of Gordon's 4th pillar, which is the exchanging of ideas. One of the key outcomes of their strategy that they employed is that it pushes data-driven decisions, it provides that visibility, which now turns into insight, among other things. As the quote says, "We have become change agents because of Cornerstone's reporting. Executives can see on a regional basis which dealers and which stores are taking training and how that relates to sales." It's a powerful capability. All right, so which leads me to my final slide of my remarks. I would encourage, this is research from Brandon Hall on Extended Enterprise. I'd encourage you to check it out. It was just published in June. Brand new stuff. The actual document title is Extended Enterprise Learning, a Profit Driver for Leading Organizations. Stay around to the end, folks. Got a cool parting gift for you. Anyway, this research is based on survey results from 23 countries, 26 industries, distributed amongst SMB enterprise and large enterprise companies. So it's a large cross-section. As you can see, just by the statistics, Extended Enterprise is good for business in a whole number of ways. So with that as a backdrop, I'm going to shift control over to Lauren, and she can show us 5 ways to create that kind of strategy as it relates to suppliers and partners. So Lauren, let me turn this over to you.
Great, thank you, Brett.
You got it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Brett. As Brett said, I'm with a company called the Educe Group. We are a partner of Cornerstone's and have experience, implementing talent management systems, but also doing a lot of strategic consulting around how systems can be leveraged, and not just for internal users, but also with the extended enterprise. So thank you all for joining, and hopefully we're going to be able to provide some valuable information to you in terms of looking at strategies specific for the extended enterprise. building on what Brett just said in terms of, who is the extended enterprise? I think it's always worth pausing for just a moment to take a look at who the extended enterprise really is. And when we use that term, who do we mean? So obviously, in the far left, we see that, employees as learners. And so you may already have an internal LMS, it may be in Cornerstone or elsewhere, and you may be involved with that effort. But when we talk about extended enterprise, then we're moving outside of that employee population to include contractors and consultants, suppliers, partners. Brett just spoke to a couple of these, potentially distributors or franchisees and other types of associated entities. And the important distinction with all of the different types of users in this middle group is that we typically know who they are. So you obviously know who your internal employees are, you have contracts with them, we know, maybe the most about the employee population as your internal set of users or your internal population. But then the second population or group, we typically will know who they are, and we can identify those. And then as we move to the left, it's even a further extension of that extended enterprise. So external customers. And these could be people, current customers, you may have, past purchase data or a database of who those people are, but potentially these are unknown, right? These are customers that if you're looking to provide training, essentially sell training outside of your organization, these could be people that we don't know who they are, right? You may be marketing to them, maybe completely new in terms of relationship with your company and providing training. So there are kind of various groups within the extended enterprise, and each will have a different, we'll think about different aspects when we think about these different populations because they may need to be treated differently, and they may need to have different capabilities or different learning, different processes in your system based on who they are. So I think before we get into the 5 keys, it's important to even look at a high level. An extended enterprise implementation can be very different from an internal implementation. And we often do work with organizations who have either worked significantly with the internal implementation or at least have knowledge, a high level of knowledge of what that was like. And so this can really be a very different kind of system and implementation and require some much different strategy considerations. And so, at a high level, more people are going to be involved because of the different elements. So starting at the left, finance is a great example of one of these areas. Potentially, if you do, with your internal system, have some sort of bill back or cost tracking of training, there may have been some finance involvement, but when you're talking about a portal where people are purchasing training, potential revenue stream, or even a tie-in potentially with sales contracts, et cetera, we're really getting in much deeper with the finance team. And we see people from this team really being brought in and part of helping to architect the strategy and the processes around use of the system. So, that could be taxation, which you may not have had to deal with before, certainly reporting and, financial considerations of that nature. The second area is marketing. Marketing definitely has a say in internally facing systems, but the level of involvement of the marketing department may be even more important when you're looking at how your company is going to be displaying itself outwardly, to external non-employees. So we may be talking about tie-ins with an external website. It may be an existing website. It could be a new website that is going to be part of this initiative. Certainly branding and making sure that you are in alignment with branding standards. And then you're looking at communication. So, if we are selling training or making it available to the general public, for example, there may be a level of marketing of your courses that you're not used to doing with the internal population if they have to take training, et cetera. But this is really almost advertising. You're really out there and you needing communication and marketing strategies that are beyond what you've needed in the past for an internal population. Legal. So legal is another area. When you're looking outside your organization, you know, what are you looking at in terms of privacy considerations with the content that you have? You know, what kind of contracts might there need to be in place if you're talking about the exchange of money? If someone is purchasing a block of training, or if this is part of, you're packaging part of this training to external users, maybe as part of a sales contract when they purchase your product. So you know, the legal team may play in as well. And then sales. We work with a lot of organizations who need to provide training to the extended enterprise as part of sales contracts. So, you know, if you have customers that are purchasing your product and they need to have training on use and maybe maintenance of that product they've purchased, oftentimes we see that that training may be purchased as part of the sales contract. So the salespeople who are selling the products then will need to be educated in what your training solution looks like, because it's part of what they are selling. And then finally, external administrators. So you may have a situation where you're already giving some administrative capability in your current LMS to internal people, but now you might need to be looking at letting externals have access to administrative capabilities. So, you know, it might be that there is a, you know, at a franchise or at, you know, one of your partner organizations, there might be a local training person, and that person might need some administrative access. So, you know, they become part of the group that you need to think about and plan for. So we're going to be getting into a lot of these areas as we go through. We're going to be talking in detail about, you know, many of these aspects. So, and I've mentioned this a couple times, but, you know, in some cases, you might already be using the LMS for employees. So you're looking at maybe adding the extended enterprise to an existing portal. And so if that is the case, then there's several things that we need to consider in how you leverage what you already have and how you adjust what you have to still keep the same experience for your existing users, but to be able to layer on potentially differences or a different user experience for those new users. And that could take a couple different forms. For your catalog, you might need to talk about availability of your learning objects in a limited way for externals, whereas internal users might have full catalog accessibility. So it might be in what's available in the learning catalog to external users, but it also might be how they navigate the catalog. So if you have a certain subject or category hierarchy built out for internal users, you really might need to think of whether the external user population looks at your training a little bit differently and might need a different categorization or subject organization. For those of you who are already Cornerstone users, the concept of organizational units will not be new to you. But organizational units are a way that we segment user populations. So if we're bringing in a new set of user or new population, we need to think about how that is going to be represented in that organizational unit hierarchy in the system. The user interface. Potentially your external users might need a different looking welcome page and different navigation. They might have access to different areas, so they might not need all of the same navigation and links that you would need in your internal LMS. And their welcome page might need to look very different in terms of what you provide access to them right on that welcome page. And additionally, even the access into the system. We're going to talk about this more in a minute, but if your internal users, say, are going into the system using single sign-on, for example, that's likely may not be the right route for your external users to be going in through that same mechanism. They might need more of a login authentication. So that would be another factor you need to consider with this new audience. So in planning for an extended enterprise implementation, these are really the 5 keys that we've identified that we find that we work with clients in defining and helping them to define their learning strategy for extended enterprise. So we feel like the 5 key questions really are, where is my user information today? How do I charge for training? How am I going to differentiate my users? What if my users need help? And then how do I engage my users? And we'll go through each one of these in detail now. So the first question, where is my user information? This is really the question around building and maintaining your user profiles. So we first ask ourselves, where is your user information? And that really means, do I even know who my users are? And so if the answer is yes, right, we may be talking about consultants and contractors or temps. Sometimes those users are in the existing HRIS system. So you already have them in a system that you can think about. You may have the profiles, you may have the information on those users already. Or you may have some sort of existing customer relationship, whether it's clients, distributors, franchisees, and you may already know who they are, and you may already have profiles for them. And those profiles may already include all the information you feel like you need. Potentially, those users might even have network access already to some internal system. We do work with a lot of extended enterprise clients that have external users that do access their network. And so they could be candidates for single sign-on, and they do already have profiles that we have that we can leverage as we bring them into the extended enterprise system. If we don't know who our users are, right, those could be clients that maybe we're not tracking. Maybe they're not tracked in a system where we feel like we have the user profile information. Or the example that I gave of the external customers, if you are selling training to the general public, we don't know who those people are when they first come to us. So we might be looking at self-registration and allowing them to create their own user accounts. And then we would need a business process around that. This might be a completely new area documenting these people, and we need to figure out how we're going to do that and what the best way for us is to get all of the information that we need. And so we think about then, what is the profile information that we need? And from a learning perspective, we look at several factors in trying to figure out what that profile needs to look like. And so how are we going to set course availability? Should certain courses only be available to certain partner organizations or certain client organizations or customer organizations? And if that's true, we need to be absolutely positive that those distinctions exist on their user profile so that the system can identify those users in a group to be able to make the course available to them. Same is true for training assignment. We see a lot of times that in an extended enterprise portal, there may be certain training, and maybe it's based on what products they've purchased from your organization or something similar. We want those users to actually be assigned the training that is applicable based on their role or purchase. And so we need to be able to, on their user profile, identify them accordingly. Pricing and discounts. So we'll talk about how are users paying for training in a moment, but as we get into extended enterprise, this is maybe an area you haven't thought about as much, especially not for the internal learners, but in an effort to market, you may be offering discounts on a periodic basis or certain special pricing. Certain groups might be eligible for better pricing. Definitely seen with organizations where people purchase some sort of membership and then they have reduced rates compared to other just general population people that are purchasing their training. And so from the user profile, we need to be able to identify those users that you want to be able to associate with different pricing and or discounts. And then welcome page. So at a high level, we might want a different welcome page for all external users. But then even as we dive deeper into that external user population, we might even want different welcome pages, and Brett mentioned this in one of his examples. We might even want a different welcome page or a different look and feel for certain customer groups. And if that's the case, again, we're going to need to know from the user profile who those users are so that we can show them the right welcome page. So once we determine what information we need to support our objectives, we need to figure out, do we already have this information? Is it already in an existing system? Or do we need to get it? And if so, how are we going to get it? Is it something that a person at a customer can give us a list of all of the users that they're going to have from their organization, and then those are somehow entered? Or is it okay to let the individual users or organizations provide this information themselves? And then beyond just the access, we're talking about how will your users register for training. So we need to look at some of the existing processes that you have to say, are we going to allow individuals to select and purchase their own training? So can they go through the learning catalog and see what you've allowed them to see and hand select, pick and choose what they would like and add it to a cart? Or does an organization, a customer, client, et cetera, purchase training for their employees and then potentially push that training? I talked about learning assignments, push that training to their users. And then is training potentially bundled within a broader contract? And so, again, I mentioned before, we see this so commonly that organizations are working with their sales teams and they are packaging training for extended enterprise as part of sales contracts. And so, that's another way that we see the training being made available specifically to specific users through those contracts. So in looking at how do I charge for training, so really designing that e-commerce process. Some of you may be coming from situations where you all are already charging for training. And so this may be an area that you already have thoughts and ideas about and lessons learned and experience under your belt. But for some, and often we see this can be a very new endeavor for an organization. An organization finds that they have some really valuable training internally that they've been using, and they then see that this training has an external value. And so it may be that they are starting down that e-commerce path. How am I going to monetize the value? How am I going to get this e-commerce potential? How am I going to leverage the value of this training and really monetize it? And so, figuring out how are we going to price it? What's the best route to go? How are we going to package training? Is it going to be sold individually, et cetera? This can be a big kind of new venture for organizations and trying to figure out what this can look like. And absolutely it varies by organization and what the right model will be. So, in some instances it might be by organization. So it could be tiered pricing for suppliers based on certification. So, you need users within your particular organization to become certified, and therefore you're going to buy this particular package, right? And so it's packaged, and it may be tiered pricing based on volume of training purchased, different packages, those kinds of things. You could offer discounts. I mentioned this a minute ago. You could offer discounts for premier clients, and so we see that a lot as well. And so those discounts can actually be reflected in the system so that the users or the organization actually sees the value of that discount. This cost to anyone else for this course would be $1,000, but you as a premier client are going to be able to purchase this for only $500, whatever the case may be. Again, contract-based pricing. And sometimes the organizations that we work with package the training with the sales contracts, and there isn't maybe an added value or a specific dollar amount that's associated with the training that's visible to the end client or organization. In other instances, there may be a menu of level 1 training, level 2 training, level 3 that you price. And each of those levels that they have the option to purchase as part of the purchase of their product might include a different level of training. So we see that quite a bit as well. It could be by course or class. So, you know, in my example of the $1,000 course, there could be a standard price for all instances of a course. So, you know, it's $1,000 to take this, you know, ILT webinar session, you know, and it's the same for everyone, and you just put the price on it, and that's, you know, that is what it is. It could be that you offer different pricing, different levels of pricing for different courses. So this instructor-led could be $1,000, and you know the other course is only $800, even though they're the same at the same location and they have the same number of hours. So there's a lot of flexibility, and from a system perspective, I feel like most of our clients find that the system is not a limitation. You know, the system is able to handle a lot of differentiation in these areas. It's more challenging to come up with the strategy and the right way to price it for your organization. That it's the strategy piece that is going to be the most challenging. Or by campaign. So again, we're looking at marketing, which may be new for some learning people that have been focused previously on internal populations, but there may be a marketing campaign that you want to do where, you know, we see this on the internet all of the time, I feel like. You know, you might be running a special where it's 20% off this certain course or these certain courses, or there could be, you know, percentage discounts again by different groups. So a lot of things to think about in terms of determining pricing. Along the same lines of the e-commerce strategy, you need to think about, once you do know how you're going to price it, what payment methods will you offer? Can users use a credit card? Can they use a check? Maybe they're training units, and training units in Cornerstone are the idea of purchasing system money, if you will, so credits. So somebody would purchase maybe in a bundle 500 training units, and then that training unit balance could be used to purchase and check out for learning items in the system. Invoice or POs. So, you know, there are a lot of different payment methods, and, you know, once you think about which ones that, you know, would even be feasible for you to accept, you really are, for each of these, are going to have to think about what sort of business process is needed to support it and what's really feasible. So, for example, for an invoice or PO, that means that someone is allowed to at least go through the checkout process and put in, you know, an invoice number, PO number, et cetera, but that payment is actually coming to you outside of the system. So what sort of process do you need to be able to track when that payment is received and then mark it in the system and then let them proceed with their training? So, you know, each of these will require thought in terms of not only do we think it's a good idea, do our users maybe want to pay this way, but then what is needed on our side to actually support it. And this is an example of CyberSource with credit card payment processing. And we don't have to go into this in detail, but Cornerstone does have an integration with CyberSource as its payment processor for, you know, credit card transactions. And so, you know, this is an avenue for that to be handled for you if you don't have an existing account with CyberSource, or if you need those credit card payments to go through the system. And so, you know, this is something that we would go through in much more detail if you were at that point and, you know, thought that credit card processing was something that you wanted to pursue. But that is a capability within the Cornerstone Extended Enterprise functionality. So in the third area, how do I differentiate the users? And that's really creating the customized experiences. So what experience do we want for our users to have? And we've mentioned several of these, but, you know, do my users need to take a very specific curriculum? They need to just go in, they need to take one curriculum, and they need to get out, you know, and never come back. Potentially, they're only there for this one transaction and this one learning opportunity. Do we only want the users to log in if they are purchasing learning? So we don't want them to be able to browse. We want them to only go in if they are going to be directly launching and purchasing training. So Cornerstone has a concept of anonymous browsing. So should users be able to come to your site, and should there be part of your site that is available before someone even potentially creates an account or logs in, where they can see what your offerings are and maybe get interested, and it's somewhat of a marketing tool for you to get them interested and show them what you have to offer. But then they would need to log in order to actually make a purchase. So they would need to either create an account or have an account already to actually be able to purchase the training or to view their transcript, et cetera, of previously taken training. What should they see in a catalog? Again, we talked about, maybe you only want them pushed training that their organization has purchased for them, or do we want to give them that browse functionality in the catalog and show them, a huge range of offerings? Should your clients feel like the experience is customized for them? As Brett mentioned, that is very successful for some for some clients, because when their people are able to log into the system, it's a very similar experience to what they have in other systems, and it seems more personalized for their company, right? They see the same company logo, they feel like it's their own system, and so that is very, very successful for some organizations. The other side of that is, if you're going to have customized experiences for all of your groups of extended enterprise users, there's a lot more maintenance involved in that. So you're talking about a lot more administration and potentially setting up 10 welcome pages or more, or 10 sites with different logos and different branding look and feel, than you are a single experience to go across all of your users. So some of the options we've talked about, but is there a single Cornerstone welcome page or that custom welcome page for specific groups or clients idea? Do you have an existing company website that you would want or need to have integrated with your extended enterprise learning system? So for example, does your company have an existing website where maybe your customer clients are already logging in, and we want this just to be an added piece of that with a single sign-on connection? We've done that for several clients, so it's a seamless experience with them coming into Cornerstone for training or learning. Configured email notifications, customized self-registration forms. So we've talked about the ability of users to potentially create their own accounts and enter the information that you need for them to have on their learner profile. And should that be a single self-registration page that all users, all external users come through, so a single access in that way? Or is there a need to have separate self-registration experiences or forms for different groups and potentially capturing different information? And so again, the capability is there, but does it make sense? Is it needed? And then what sort of processes would you put in place to be able to manage that? What if my users need help? So establishing an operational structure. The first thing we think about is, who is your main contact? For an affiliated entity, when we look at a franchise or something similar, that may be the head of the franchisee organization. It could be the entity training administrator, or it could be some sort of client purchasing representative. For an individual user purchase, it's that particular individual user. They are your main contact. It may be that they are coming to you through some sort of existing organizational relationship, or it could be completely new without any other affiliation. And so based on who those key contacts are, we need to think about what sort of operational processes do we need to define. Looking at end user support, what kind of help might they need, and how are we going to provide that help? Creating new accounts. So maybe they self-register, but if they don't, how are those accounts going to be created? Are you going to get lists from potentially the head learning contact at one of your client organizations, and then you're going to add those users into the system? So we need to think about what sort of processes that need to be put in place to manage that. Marketing and promotions, we've talked about it, but what is that website going to look like? What is the external user going to see? What kind of communications are you going to get out to them to entice them to want to buy your training, or if they have purchased it, to actually use it so they're getting value out of that purchase? And what kind of special campaigns might you be launching to support those efforts? Around the financial area, it's not just the reporting and it's not just the purchase, but how are you going to handle refunds or cancellations? We need to potentially identify policies around those. Are refunds always granted? Are they only granted 30 days prior to the start of a training, et cetera? And what does that look like? Who's going to be involved from your team in order to process those? How much can you automate? All of those types of questions. And then the learning itself, right? Pricing, legal, and availability. We've talked about those concepts, but you're also going to need to define the operational processes around each of those. When you have a new piece of training that you want to make available externally, how is that training going to be priced? Who are the players? Who needs to be involved in that decision? Does it need to go through some sort of legal approval or review? Those kinds of things, we need to have processes in place to handle those. And lastly, how do I engage my users? So continuously engaging those users and getting them to come back to your portal, to come, initially we talk about the marketing communications, but how do we keep them coming back? It may not be sufficient for them to have a one-time purchase and then never come back. We want to try to leverage and keep those customers. So, possible approaches that we've seen work for other organizations would include periodically offering maybe limited free training. One of our clients offered a free 1 hour, it was a web-based training, so it wasn't that they were incurring any instructor-led costs, and they offered one course a month, and they rotated which course it was going to be so that there were always, there was always something new, giving them reasons to come back on a monthly basis. And they offered that as a free, course in their system. Incentives for discounts, again, can be very powerful. Free resources upon completions of a course. So if someone, completes something, you're giving them some sort of value after the fact that can encourage them to keep coming back. And again, in any of these, as we talk through these, every industry is different. And so you need to be thinking about what is meaningful for your particular user group. So for example, the free resources upon completion of a course, that's going to look very different in terms of what would even have value for users, right? It's going to be very dependent on the dynamics of your extended enterprise population and maybe your type of business. It could be CE credit. So that's one example that we've seen as a big factor, whether it's for an accounting firm or, something similar. If the users are getting something that they need, continuing education credits is a great example, then that can potentially keep them coming back. And then also communities or collaboration. We are seeing organizations start to implement successful social collaboration with their extended enterprise portals, bringing together their users and letting them communicate and share information. And that can be a very powerful way to keep them coming back, to continue the dialogue and the conversation that maybe they're starting with fellow franchisees or fellow distributors, et cetera. So I know that was a quick run through of those 5 areas. I feel like it's a lot of ground to cover, and it sounds like we're mostly asking questions, and that really in terms of the strategy, that is really the truth, right? We're asking all of these questions that maybe you haven't asked yourself before, but hopefully this is at least able to give you a look into the kinds of questions you need to be thinking about and asking yourself as you're getting ready to potentially embark on a new extended enterprise venture, or relooking at what you're already doing.
And Lauren, thanks for that. That's so important, because I would imagine in your experience that people are coming to extended enterprise for the first time. They have all these decisions to make, and what I really liked were the very specific strategies that you provided as real nut and bolt things they've got to be considering, because it is different than implementing just an internal LMS. So thank you for that. We do have a number of questions for you. And let me start with this one. In terms of your experience, do most of the customers try to set up single sign-on, or is it more prevalent for suppliers and partners to come in, say, via a separate landing page? And a two-part question, how often do you see self-registration in that process?
That's a great question, and I can say that I actually see a lot of examples of all of those scenarios. So some clients already have what they would call a customer portal, where maybe their customers or distributors are already going into a portal that they've created for other reasons, for other resources, and it's a better user experience for them if those users from that portal can immediately just click into Cornerstone, be authenticated, and come in. And so we do a lot of that type of of integration with those existing systems, creating the user accounts in Cornerstone based on the accounts that are in their existing portal, potentially including additional information that the users can populate once they get into Cornerstone, just on the Cornerstone system. Or some organizations, we actually work with them to add the fields they need for their LMS to the registration page for their existing custom portal. So we've done a couple different ways.
So lots of different scenarios.
Yeah, and self-registration, we do see that a lot. I think, what you need to think about, I think the big thing with self-registration is does there need to be an approval process? I feel like this is always a big question. Is it okay for just anyone to come in and take training? Or do you potentially have some training that you'd want to be able to approve? Even if you want them to self-register, you'd have to be actually, you want to be able to approve before they can actually touch any of your training. And so Cornerstone does have that capability to offer approvals, but then you're also, if you have a potential sale in progress, do you really want to slow that process down? So with self-registration, you have some additional things you need to think about to be sure that that works for your organization.
Okay. Along the lines of change management, because I know you've done a lot of those workshops as well, and one of the last points you were making is to keep people interested in coming back to the portal. Any advice in terms of what people launching extended enterprise for the first time, any sense of how far in advance of the go-live date they ought to be promoting this to their partners and suppliers?
That's a great question. I'm always going to say, not too far in advance, not too last minute, right? But I think that does vary for organizations. I feel like you don't want to be promoting it and generating questions too far in advance if you're not ready to give them at least enough information that they feel comfortable. We don't want to make them uncomfortable. Some big change is coming and scare them, but you do want to, if it's something that's an exciting change, then you might want to promote it early, right? Just the fact that it's coming may be exciting. I think different organizations or user populations have different tolerances for change. But I would always say that I would start change management as early as possible. When you get your extended enterprise strategy really in motion and you start making some decisions about some of the things that we've been talking about today, once you have a start on that, then I would get started right away on that change management plan and assessing what you're going to need to do and what makes the most sense. Because we do see a lot of times organizations get caught up really in the strategy and the implementation, and then they don't start change management until they're at UAT for their system. And at that point, it's so late in the game that they've potentially missed some really powerful marketing opportunities and communication opportunities.
Yeah, that matches with my experience. You've kind of a delicate process. To your point, you don't want to overdo it, and then people will just be so practiced in reading emails that it says it's coming, they'll just miss the whole thing altogether. A couple of questions in the chat, Lauren. If you run into a situation where the external client already has an internal LMS and they're looking to go to extended, and what has been your experience in terms of the client's viewpoint and thoughts about using Cornerstone's Extended Enterprise, even if they're using a different LMS?
So is the question that when we say external client, we're talking about your external client, so your customer or your distributor has their own LMS, and is the question then they think, I want to take your training in my own site versus in an outside LMS?
Well, I think actually the person clarified it. It was, would an extended enterprise solution really be needed if an external client already has an existing LMS? Is it worth the effort to actually spin up extended enterprise, or do you find clients say, no, we'll just somehow port content over to your existing LMS? What's your experience with that? I know it's a tough question. I'm trying to think about it.
I just worked with an organization, and if I understand what you're saying correctly, so I just worked with an organization where all of their customers already have their own LMSs, or many of them do, and they didn't want their users to be able to, didn't have to go to some other, in this case they were hospital systems, right? And the hospital systems already have their own LMSs. They didn't want to have to go to this vendor's site to actually take the training. And so some of these hospital systems wanted to have the content that our client owned for their product training and have it, like you said, ported into their own internal hospital LMS. And so that really becomes a very different case, because then you're talking about, I feel like, selling your training. They're putting it in their own LMS, right? And so that's a very different case. Do you want them to be able to do that? How are you getting them those that content? Are you, once they upload those courses to their own LMS systems and deploy them there, you lose control over it. So, yeah, it's definitely outside of this extended enterprise kind of typical instance, but I'm not saying I've never seen it. And I think my client ultimately discontinued their pre-existing practice of allowing hospital organizations to actually take their content and put it in their own LMSs, and they required those hospital, the hospital personnel, nurses, et cetera, to actually come to their system. Yeah,
yeah. And I would think another workaround might be, especially when you're leveraging single sign-on, to where if the concern is limited to getting credit for taking courses in an extended enterprise environment, I think there are technical and integration workarounds for that. It's all about designing the portal and the access in such a way that it'd just be easier for the end user. It's kind of invisible to them whether they're using their existing LMS or porting over to Cornerstone. I think there's technical workarounds for that if the chief concern is, I don't want my users to feel like they're having to jump around in two systems or not getting credit in one. Along those same lines, somebody asked, and this is more job role related, how do you handle a case where someone comes into the extended enterprise as part of one group, let's say a nurse, and now they want to sign up for extended enterprise as another group or job role, say nurse practitioner? Is there a way to reconcile that in the system? Or everybody needs to go based on their profile under one role?
Right, and this is a great example of use cases that you need to think through, right? My first question in something like this would be, why? What's their distinction? That why do they need to be a nurse and a nurse practitioner, right? And if it's a matter that they really can only be one or the other, right? That they really, and for your purposes, really are either only a nurse or a nurse practitioner at any one time, we do need to figure out what that looks like. Is this a field that we enable them in the Cornerstone or in your Extended Enterprise portal to change this value themselves, and there are ways that that can be done. You know, we can enable them to go in on a custom field and be able to change it, and you know, we can leverage groups then based on those custom fields to assign training and, you know, identify users. Or is it a situation where it's okay, and it might very well be the case that someone has two distinctions that are valid at a given point in time. So maybe I am a nurse and a nurse practitioner. Maybe I do, you know, work different roles at different hospital systems or something like that. And if that's the case, then we need to think about how we reflect those distinctions on the user profile to allow for that kind of multi, you know, they can have both of those roles and then potentially have access to the training that's applicable for both of those roles.
Yeah, it's kind of like your earlier advice, pay some attention to differentiating your users and where that user information comes from. Another question for you, Lauren, in the chat. Are there other payment gateways available beyond CyberSource?
So at this point, when we're talking about credit cards, CyberSource is the Cornerstone option. It is on the Cornerstone roadmap for an integration with PayPal. And I'm not sure, I don't think it's in this next coming, I don't think it's in the October release, but I believe that it's coming in 2018, or at least that's the plan for the roadmap.
Okay. I think I got time for one more question here. Let me pick a good one here. Oh, different currencies. Is that, if you've got a multinational client base, how are multi-currencies handled? Are they handled through the user profile?
Yes, they can be. So, you know, there's several different ways that it can be set up. You know, and when we talk about multi-currency, it's A, what the user sees, but it's also how are you going to set your pricing? So, you know, do you want to be in the business of saying, okay, that, you know, it's going to be $10 or not, so $100 in US dollars, and then, you know, X amount in pounds and X amount in yen, or whatever the case may be? Or do you want those potentially to be, you know, you set one price, maybe that's the US, you know, that's the dollar price, and then the system goes ahead and does the conversion for what displays for the other currencies.
Oh, I see.
And then if you get to the currency, then you think, okay, well, what is the system going to use to do that conversion if we want them to do it? And, you know, that has to be managed. You're going to have to, you know, there's got to be some set of conversion rates established in the system for the system to be able to do that. So when you get into multi-currency, you know, there's a big effect on pricing. Absolutely, user can see pricing based on their user profile, like you mentioned, but, you know, we need to think about what kind of complexity we're looking at in terms of pricing.
Okay, good, thank you. I think we're about out of time. Did you pass me control, or do you still have control? If so, just advance to our last slide. Oh, you got me as presenter.
Sorry, I just put you in.
That's all right. Let me advance here. I teased everybody earlier. Really good research from Brandon Hall on the extended enterprise. I would say I'd encourage you to go look at it, but you're going to get it. You're going to get it via email later this week from Katie, and it's really good, straightforward research. Answers a lot of questions I'm sure we didn't get to today. I want to thank Lauren for a fabulous presentation. There's no question how popular this particular information she provides is. It was a big hit at conversion. And I want to thank all of you for joining the webinar today. Thank you very much. Have a great day.